Good evening, everyone. My name is Trish Murphy and I'm the Acting Director of Student Counselling in Trinity College, Dublin. You're very welcome to tonight's event, which is hosted by the Dublin Book Festival. And tonight we're discussing two books on anxiety, a very topical issue, as I imagine all of you listening agree with me. So tonight we have books to talk about by two authors. The first author we're going to discuss is Dr. Malie Coyne, and she's a clinical psychologist and psychology lecturer in NUIG, and she sits on the Mental Health Advisory Panel for the Lust for Life charity. With her considerable experience of working with children and families, Malie is fast becoming one of the leading voices in compassionate parenting in Ireland. Through her advocacy work, public speaking, print, radio and television contributions, Malie shines a light on mental health issues and promotes well-being throughout our lives. Our second speaker is Brendan Kelly, who is a professor of psychiatry at Trinity College Dublin and consultant psychiatrist at Telehospital Dublin. He is the author of Coping with Coronavirus, How to Stay Calm and Protect Your Mental Health, and that's the book we're going to talk about tonight. And with Dr. Murs Houston, he's recently published a book called Psychiatrist in the Chair, the official biography of Anthony Clare. So tonight, first we're going to discuss Malie's book, and I thought I'd tell you a little bit about it first. So this book is called Love In, Love Out, a compassionate approach to parenting your anxious child. And in her book, Malie sets out to help parents to help their anxious children. Drawing from key psychological theories and real-life case studies, Malie translates her knowledge and experience into practical advice for busy families and stressed-out parents. As parents learn to become the emotional anchor from which their child can learn to trust and begin to explore the world, they will find the balance between helping their anxious children feel safe and encouraging them to face their fears as they grow and develop. Filled with hands-on activities and centered on a compassionate, kind approach to children and their parents, Love In, Love Out will become a bedside Bible for parents of children of any age, helping them to negotiate the many bumps in the road to managing their anxiety. So Malie, my first question for you this evening is, in your book, you speak about your own experience as an anxious child. How important was this background to the writing of the book?
Hi, Trish, and hi, everybody who's here. Thank you for coming. I'm delighted to be here tonight. I was an anxious child. They say about 15% of children are born with a more anxious temperament, and I certainly was one of those. Around the age of 9, 10, I started having stomach aches. I didn't want to go to crowded places. I was afraid of getting lost, and even worse, that my parents wouldn't come and find me. So I just had the weight of the world on my shoulders. And at the time I was brought to the doctor and given a placebo drug, which was like a white powder, supposedly to make me better. But I remember my older brother and sister kind of laughing about it, going, oh, that's only a fake drug. That's not a real drug. And me really feeling alone in my anxiety. And I don't blame my parents. And, I think, we parent the way we were parented. And, I suppose the knowledge about anxiety wasn't as prominent there in terms of associating stomach aches with anxiety. But I really felt like I was going to write a book anyway at some stage, and it was going to be most likely a book on parenting because that's my area of expertise. But because there's so much anxiety out there nowadays, even before the coronavirus, I felt that it was important for me to write that because I had experienced anxiety as a child. Also because I am a parent now. I have 2 daughters, and I suppose I struggle as a parent, like I think most parents do. And I felt that I wanted to facilitate the understanding between children and their parents, because many of us judge ourselves for feeling the way we do. So we might add shame to anxiety. So the child might feel bad about feeling anxious. The parent might feel not good enough about not knowing how to cope with their child's anxiety, because it does create this sense of freezing amongst the child and the parent. So what I wanted to do with my book was to facilitate that understanding between the child and the parent. And so, yeah, I suppose my experience as a child definitely had a bearing on how I wrote it. And a lot of me is in there as the child and also as the parent, but also as the professional, which was kind of a difficult thing to do when I was writing it. But I hope that those different elements are represented.
I think it certainly gives it a really true ring, to have your own experience in there. You talk about the worry parents have about focusing too much on the anxiety of their child. Can you tell us why you suggest they acknowledge the anxiety rather than just brushing over it?
Yeah, I think in the media, I've heard it quite a number of times about children being, this generation being school flakes or snowflakes, and how, we talk about mental health too much. I even had a parent come to me and say that, they were afraid to talk to their child about the child's anxiety because they were afraid that it would make them feel worse. And in fact, it was suggested to them by a therapist that, maybe that they don't discuss it too much in for the fear of it becoming worse. But I suppose as an anxious child, I would have loved somebody to talk to me about how I felt and to try to unpack my worries and my fears. And I think, as with any other feeling, if you're feeling a strong feeling, for somebody to address it with you and to validate it for you is really important, because anxiety feels very real, even though it mightn't make sense to the parent. For the 5-year-old, say, to be afraid of monsters, or the 12-year-old of going to school, or whatever it is, it feels so real. It's such a physical response in our bodies. Like, anxiety causes physical symptoms, this rush of fight or flight adrenaline through your body, which then kind of muddies up your thought process. It makes you think doom and gloom thoughts. And all of that has come into play. So if your child tells you they're anxious, they're recruiting you for a sense of safety. And if you tell them, oh, don't worry, everything's fine, or distract away from it, or whatever, that sense of threat becomes bigger for them, because suddenly their recruit, their one person that they need in that moment, has told them, that threat isn't real, and just dismissed it. And I can understand why parents do that, because I can understand why parents move away from negative feelings generally. It's because when we address vulnerability with our children, we have to go to a vulnerable place ourselves. And we don't like our children feeling bad in any way, be it anxiety, sadness, anger. We don't want that. So that's why we try to move away from it. But in fact, minimizing it doesn't help. And that same parent that I used as an example, who wasn't bringing up anxiety with his teenager, came back to me a week later after I suggested that he bring it up. And he just said that her response was very, she was relieved that he had brought it up. And he realized that he wasn't bringing it up because it was too painful for him to do it. But in fact, it started off a conversation. It doesn't mean that bringing it up will resolve it all, but it starts the conversation about, maybe unpacking and seeing what, you're afraid to go to school. What parts about going to school are you most afraid of? So it's about validation. And we try to do that with children's emotions, generally speaking. So I felt that was really important to say, because anxiety feels extremely real to the person who has it.
And I love, there's an TV ad at the moment, where the little kid gets his granddad to look to see if the monster is under the bed. And I just think it's a lovely validation,
Yeah.
that the grandfather looks, and it makes you feel really warm, because the child is taken so seriously.
Yeah. And what's really nice about that, even for the parent or for the grandparent, is that the second you become playful with your child's anxiety, rather than freeze up, you kind of start to become playful and go, oh, the monster, tell me, what does the monster look like? I know it's hard to do that at 5 a.m, but you become playful, and suddenly your body relaxes into it as well. Yeah. So trying to see it from your child's point of view.
Exactly. Can you take us through your SAFE model? You call this you call it in the chain of resilience, which I really like. And I think this is a really good guide for parents.
Yeah, I suppose this was all kind of thought out before I even started writing the book. I was thinking of the chain of survival, and I was thinking of using an acronym that could bring parents through steps, like step by step, because I know that parents like having the steps, So the first part of my book is very much based on the compassionate approach, and I'll talk to you about that in a few minutes. But the second part of my book is very much the action part of it. And it all came from the fact that the anxiety plus compassion equals resilience. That's what I kind of felt, that if we add a compassionate approach to anxiety, then we create resilience for our children. So it's not about trying to move away from difficult feelings. We try to stay with difficult feelings. And when a child is anxious, they lose access to a certain part of their brain, which is the reasoning part, the frontal lobe part of your brain. So the fight or flight chemicals go through their bodies, and they go into that fight or flight mode where they have all these physical symptoms. Their heart is racing, they're sweating, they want to fight, run away, or freeze. And they've lost access to the reasoning part. So if you tell your child when they're in the middle of that panicky state, there's nothing to worry about, you're fine, or else give them a problem solving technique like you should do this or you should do that, then they're not actually going to be able to compute that information. So I thought it was really important from a kind of, I'm very much into the area of trauma and the way the brain processes information, but I needed to simplify that for parents. So the S is for self-care. And I'll talk to you about this in a case study in a few minutes, just to kind of let it come to life. But the self-care part, the S, is about how you look after yourself as a parent and regulate your own emotions, because you won't be able to help your child with their emotions unless you can regulate your own emotions. And those are the signs of safety your child needs. They need to know in the moment when you're trying to help them that you're not in a panicky state, which can be a difficult thing. Sometimes you have to fake it before you make it. So S is for self-care. The A is for anchoring, which are these really lovely strategies you can use to help your child feel safe and secure. What do you do with that adrenaline? Sometimes you might shake out the adrenaline. You might breathe like a dragon. Use your child's imagination and playful techniques to actually anchor them. You're trying to relax their bodies, or you're trying to use their adrenaline to kind of shake it out a bit. And there's lots of little strategies in my book for that. And then feeling felt is this idea by neuropsychiatrist Dan Siegel in his book, The Whole Brain Child, which talks about helping your child feel connected and relating to them. And it's really kind of saying, I'm here with you. You're validating their feelings. You're unpacking their worry, trying to figure out what exactly it is that they're worried about. And then finally, you get to the E, which is empowerment, which is giving your child the tools to manage their anxiety. And in that part of the book, I have interviews with a cognitive behavioral therapist who helps me with looking at a teenager who's transitioning from a primary to secondary school. And we have a case study. I have a contribution from a play therapist who helps me with a younger child with anxiety, and then a mindfulness teacher and mindfulness, I suppose, can be used for any age group, and kindfulness, which is a kind of a compassionate approach. So really, I try to kind of, I wasn't saying I was the expert on all of those. I like the idea of doing an interview with these professionals that could, and with real life case studies, obviously anonymously.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. And again, to come back to that compassionate piece, you open the book with one hope you have for your children, and that is that they will be compassionate. And you go on to speak about the many aspects of compassion, both as parent and as a therapist. Why is this so important to you?
Well, I started learning about compassion focused therapy a few years ago. I was working on this documentary for RTE called Stressed, and it was just this approach that came to me, and it made so much sense in terms of like compassionate parenting. And there isn't actually that much written about it really, but it's all about parenting that talks about that the importance of emotions, or emotions tell us things about what's going on underneath. They signal a need in our children, and the importance of looking at the needs of our children by looking at their emotions really. Another aspect of it is that there's 3 circles in a compassion focused therapy. One is threat, one is drive, one is soothing. And when a child or a parent's threat circle is really quite big, we need to counterbalance that by soothing. So really using a compassionate approach really decreases anxiety. It has been found to really help with low mood, anxiety, and that can really help. Also, I suppose the whole idea is it's kind of looking at the importance of vulnerability. That vulnerability in parenting is, if we want to love with all our hearts, we need to show our children that vulnerability is okay, and we don't need to be perfect, and they don't certainly need to be perfect. And I'm hugely passionate about attachment theory, Bowlby's attachment theory, and the importance of the connection between the child and the parent. It's absolutely crucial. And that's why I felt like the parent is the anchor to the child, and they'll always be the child's anchor, even when the child grows up. But really important is the child is either in attachment theory, either going out to explore their world or coming back in for their parent as their safe haven. So using that attachment model was really important. And I like the compassionate approach uses that as well. So, and then another element of it finally is about that idea of common humanity. We all struggle as parents. It's okay to struggle. We're all struggling during this pandemic in one way or another, and it's okay. And then use the mindfulness aspect is about accepting your feelings as they are, even when they're difficult. So this is what it feels like to be a human right now, or to be a parent right now with a child who's suffering with, who has difficulties with anxiety, and then bringing kindness. So it's about, rather than criticizing ourselves as parents, which we are experts at doing, it's about bringing kindness to ourselves and saying, it's okay. I don't know how to help my child right now, but I'm just going to take a breath and just tell myself it's okay. It's all right,
Well, I think if you get people to do that, you'll have won, definitely.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you about an example here.
Yeah.
So a young girl who's now 10 is experiencing nightmares. These stem from childhood, but there were no precipitating factors in childhood. However, her dad did spend time in hospital with tumours when she was about 7, and the nightmares got worse since then. She's now unable to stay at a friend's house due to fear of getting a nightmare and what might happen. So just that kind of, no particular precipitating effect, and yet something which made it a little worse later on. And, that fear, which obviously often happens then about what happens if she's not at home.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose using my safe approach, I would say that it's really important, firstly, to kind of reassure the parent and say to the parent that nightmares are quite normal for children in terms of processing things that go on in their daily lives, but also in terms of their worries or if a traumatic event has happened. Obviously, if they go on for a long time, and a child of the age of 10 is kind of out at the outer limit of, usually nightmares, you'd see it in younger children. But I'd wonder with this child whether whether it's just nightmares that she's having, or does she have generally a more anxious disposition? Does she have other worries going on in her life? So I think that's kind of important. But if we adopt that safe approach, the self-care aspect would be kind of exploring any discomfort in the parent by your child's nightmares. So how long have they been going on for? This is what I would say to a parent in a session. So how long have they been going on for? What's your idea about what they might be about? When did they start? What kinds of things does she dream? What are the nightmares? What are the themes of the nightmares? How does it feel for you that your 10-year-old is having such frequent nightmares? It might be disrupting their sleep, so they might be at their they're like really, really frustrated, I suppose. And also, like, if the dad had tumors in hospital, like, what is that situation like at the moment? I'd want to know the context of, is he better? Is there general anxiety in the home, or have things improved and these nightmares have continued? The main question being, what do you need as a parent to support your daughter right now? And I would say that no matter what the anxiety situation. And then we move on to anchoring, which is really, you are your child's anchor and helping them feel safe and secure. And that's a really important role in the middle of the night when your child wakes up with a nightmare, because they don't need a big, long conversation about what the nightmare was about and, in the middle of the night, it's kind of more about helping them to feel safe and secure, but not having the big long conversation. So even before they go to bed, it's about kind of setting the scene for them going to bed in terms of, maybe not watching stuff on telly that might upset them in any way. And, having a regular bedtime, having a nice little sleep routine, a bed that's cozy, a peaceful place, a dream catcher, favorite toy, something that might help them. And then when they wake up in the middle of the night, to kind of reassure them that you're there, maybe have a plan of action that in the days beforehand, and just kind of say, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to briefly come into you, reassure you, kind of offer you comfort. But then helping them to go back to sleep is, maybe giving them a little animal to have. With my daughter, when she has a nightmare, I just go downstairs and get her a glass of milk. And that seems to kind of reset her, ask her if she needs to go toilet. And sometimes I might even say, you tell me when you want me to go, and I might put my hand on her. And usually she just wants me to go, and she just wants to keep going. Do you know, that kind of way? And then the F is for feeling felt. So it's maybe the next day. It's about the next day, helping your child to maybe unpack what the nightmare was about. Maybe even get them to draw the nightmare and maybe imagine a different ending for it. Psychoeducation, which is this whole thing about helping them to understand that lots of kids have nightmares, and that it could be that she's not having a nightmare about the dad at all, or that trauma. It could be to do with something going on at school, with somebody being mean to her, whatever it could be. And then finally, the E is for empowerment, which is kind of, then you can move on to problem solving with your child using playful techniques, or you could have a head, using an app to help them to fall asleep. Really asking your child what might be most helpful to them, because I think empowering a child really gives them that sense of, I can do this, a sense of agency. But children with anxiety have active imagination, so it's not surprising that some kids just have more nightmares than others.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
And finally, would you like to tell us why you called your book Love In, Love Out? It's a really interesting title.
Yeah. God. The story of my title. I was imagining titles for hours and hours and hours for this book when I should have been writing. Okay. You do anything, you'd iron your pajamas, instead of writing when you need to be writing. So really, I was writing my book, and then I was having coffee one morning with a friend of mine when I was maybe halfway through the book. No title had stuck. No title had, Safe to Let Go was one of them, but it just hadn't stuck. And then my friend, who I met in the post-labor ward, and we were like opposite each other after having our second babies, in a very vulnerable position in terms of, I won't go into the details of it, but just, vulnerable, very emotional, in pain, lots of different things going on. And that particular day, she said to me, Malie, I love the mantra, love in, love out. And I said, what does that mean to you? And she says, when I'm having a really difficult parenting moment, a really, really hard one, what I do is just kind of breathe in love and breathe out love. And it helps her to remind her to pause, because we all, like, that whole idea of compassionate parenting is about knowing you actually have a choice in how you respond to your child. But if you respond automatically, you might respond in a way that you wish you hadn't. There's always room for repair if you do that, and that's fine. But it's kind of using a mantra, whether it be love in, love out, whether it be breathe, or whether it be may I be kind to myself, whether it be stepping outside the room when you're feeling overwhelmed, whatever it is, taking a moment as a parent and letting yourself know, I am good enough. It's okay. Everybody struggles. And just, I've had many, many moments where I've made a different choice, as a parent, in terms of even reacting to my child's, the monsters in our room at night, and that it's had a huge impact when I've actually breathed in and out, rather than said, come on, you have to go to bed now. And, this kind of anxious response, if I kind of breathe, but I know it's not easy to do that in the middle of the night, or sometimes so that's why I think self-care is important, because we all need to fill our cups. If we don't fill our cups as parents, we can't give love out to our children. So that's really where that came from.
I think it's very captivating, the title. You pick it up and just be interested just by the title itself.
That's great.
So when I discovered it was a mantra, I thought, really beautiful. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Malie.
Thank you.
Now we're going to move on to Professor Brendan Kelly and his book, Coping with Coronavirus and How to Stay Calm and Protect Your Mental Health. So I'm going to just read you a little blurb about this, just to set the scene. The anxiety associated with coronavirus is different to the anxiety seen in traditional disorders because demonstrably there is something to fear, and that's what makes this worry so ubiquitous, so persistent and so challenging to manage. The good news is that just as we are capable of finding sophisticated ways to make ourselves more anxious, we are equally good at finding sophisticated ways to manage our mental health once we put our minds to it. Anxiety management techniques help hugely once they are modified to suit the new situation that we face. And in Coronavirus, a psychological toolkit, Dr. Brendan Kelly will give you all the practical tools you and your family need to navigate these dark, uncertain days. There's a tall order. So you wrote this book at the very early stages in the pandemic. What led you to produce the book so quickly, and what needs were you hoping to meet?
Well, Trish, thank you very much for asking me this and for having me here. And can I just say, I really enjoyed Malie's talk just now. I think it touched on so many important things that will strike a chord with so many parents. And the book, Love In, Love Out, is wonderful. It just really is wonderful. I was looking at it the other day. Why did I write a book called Coping with Coronavirus? Maybe I wasn't coping too good with coronavirus myself to begin with. The quick answer is I was self-isolating for 2 weeks and then another 2 weeks. And I was at home for nearly a month, just thinking about coronavirus and looking at what was going on around me and looking at me and other people becoming very irrationally anxious and forgetting the things that I knew that would help my anxiety. You know, a lot of cognitive behavior therapy, we use these ideas ourselves to an extent, but suddenly it was as if all our coping mechanisms were gone out the window and we had forgotten the normal things we do to cope with the anxieties in our lives, which is so regrettable because now more than ever, we do need to keep a focus on how we manage our emotions, how we manage our feelings. So the book, and it's a short little toolkit really, was with that in mind, just to try and help us manage an anxiety that could feel infinite. It could feel bigger than the world, utterly uncontrollable, and yet we could bring it down to scale when we try.
Yeah, and I think that surprisingly has increased even with time. And again, to ask you about this, because now that we're in the 8th month of the pandemic, which is shocking to even say it, what do you see as the dominant emerging symptoms in the mental health world? And do you think many of these symptoms need clinical intervention? So, like, are we, getting worse, if you like?
Well, it's so interesting to listen to discussions about this because a lot of people talk about, a tsunami of mental illness happening. But really what we're seeing is a tsunami of anxiety and frustration that's at a level that most people can cope with to a significant degree. So if you told me last year the amount of inconvenience, restriction, and anxiety that I would be living with, and for the most part coping with, I wouldn't have believed you. We are so resourceful that we can cope far better than we expect. So I think the biggest problem here in month 8 or month 9 or whatever it is frustration that this is going on for so long, frustration at not knowing an end point. But this does need to be matched by an awareness and an admiration for our own ability to cope. People are coping with extraordinary things, and we don't give ourselves credit for that. I mean, parents out there, to kind of go back to Malie's theme perhaps, parents out there are doing such an amazing job with children who are living very altered lives, and parents are having to step into roles. Children don't meet their friends as often, so a lot of parents are trying to fill that gap as best they can and doing a great job. They don't give themselves credit often enough for what they do. So I think at this stage it's the prolonged nature of it and the difficulty just staying the course. But that's exactly what we need to do, just stay the course.
And in your book, you take us through different sections, and one of the sections is about being. and it was quite an interesting section. And as a world, we are facing these big existential dilemma, a crisis for all of us, for all of humanity. How does your book help us to both think about this and to cope with that at an individual level?
Well, I mean, the coronavirus is so big and the existential dilemma so limitless that what I do is I think about it from 3 o'clock on a Saturday until 3:30. I limit my existential angst to a 30 or 60-minute period on a Saturday, because we cannot think about these big issues every moment of every day. You know, if I need to go and buy a litre of milk, what I need to do is bring a face covering and observe social distancing. I don't need to question what the pandemic means to the nature of being a human. I don't need to question the statistical validity of the R number. What I need to do is just take my mask and do social distancing. Now so what I advise people to do is to look at the public health guidance from the government and to follow it, to not do the things that are prohibited, but look at the things that are permitted and do those very actively. So it's to respect the permissions as much as the prohibitions, and simply accept the advice most of the time. About once a week, engage in critical thought about it, because it's important we think critically, but we cannot think critically about these things every moment or of every day, or else we'll be paralyzed.
But I think that's such good advice. If you could just get your mind to behave itself and to think for a half an hour a day about something, maybe it takes a lot of training.
Well, I'll tell you what it takes. It takes severely limiting our media intake about the pandemic. So in the book, I recommend that you tune into the global picture, you know, the national or the international news twice a day for 15 minutes only. Now, between those times, COVID-19 will intervene in your life in direct ways, things you can or cannot do, and that's okay. Just do not try to carry a global pandemic on your shoulders all day long. 15 minutes morning and evening, and at 8 p.m. you take your phone, you put it in the boot of the car, and it doesn't come out until 8 a.m. the next morning.
That would certainly increase some people's anxiety, I imagine. Okay, you start your book with some questions, some great questions. How worried should I be? What information can I trust? What should I tell the children? Can I survive the panic, let alone the virus? So can you give us some hope that these questions can be answered successfully?
Yes, they can certainly be answered successfully. How worried should I be? We should all be a bit worried, but we should not be worried to the point of paralysis. We should worry about the aspects of this we can control. We can control our own behavior and, you know, to an extent, people around us, the way we influence them. We cannot control great big random events. We cannot control mink farms in Denmark. We cannot control what happens in Pfizer's lab. You know, we can't control these things. They come to us out of nowhere. So, you know, we shouldn't invest too much when they do happen or when they don't happen. And we do need to focus on what we can control. That will reduce our worries. What information do we trust? We trust information from the government. Make a working assumption that that is good information. Question it about once a week and look up other sources, but make a working assumption you trust the guidance. That is a path to, you know, quietude at least. What do we tell the children? Well, this is Malie's area, but the big thing in that sentence is tell the children, because the children already know, and they might have a version of events or a take on it that's not quite right. So we do talk to children about it, but translate it into actions like hand washing, practical things, or the kind of advice that's in Malie's book. And the last question was, can we survive the panic, let alone the virus? Of course, the answer is that we can. There's so much that we can control once we sort of use very simple techniques like limiting our media intake, watching our physical activities. I think Malie made a really good point talking about anxiety in the body and recognizing that we are embodied. Our heads are stuck right onto our bodies. The idea that they're separate is absolutely ludicrous. So I really like the connections that she drew between anxiety psychologically and physically. And once we remember these things, these help us cope.
And again, to come back to that piece at the beginning about there's something about this anxiety there's a realness in it. You know, there's a truth in it. Like a lot of anxiety is based on fear of the unknown or something, but this is actually real. So can you give us, say, 3 practical steps to deal with this? Because there is a reality to it as well as another aspect to it. Yeah.
So anxiety is so interesting to think about, because a lot of people who experience severe anxiety, a little logical part of their brain knows that it is disproportionate at the very least. And yet the anxiety comes in waves. So there's a built-in conflict in a lot of anxiety, because there is this little logical bit of a person's brain telling them that this is completely over the top. With this, it is a little different. There is, something to be anxious about, but most of us know how anxious we should be, and we know that we overdo it. So important things for us to do. We need to take breaks from COVID in our heads, little holidays from it. And our brains and our minds are amazing things. We're more than capable of doing this. And a lot of us do it anyway, only we don't know it. So in recent years, there's a great deal of talk about mindfulness, of which I am a huge fan, and meditation. And that's really good. You get absorbed in the moment and everything else disappears. You're in a state of flow and connection, and the past is gone, the future is gone. So that's really nice. But a lot of people do not like that language. The language of mindfulness and meditation just feels a bit new agey, a bit phooey for people. But when you look into people's lives, they're doing it already. So let's say someone who goes for a run and loses track of time. And when you ask them about it, they say there is only the movement, the sound of their feet. There's nothing else in the world. Or a colleague of mine who swims. I said, why do you swim? And she said, because everything else disappears. There is only the movement of swimming. She says, it's like she's not there herself. There is only the movement. So that's the number one thing, to find that activity, be it gardening, be it knitting, be it running, be it meditating, and absorb yourself in it, get into a state of flow, and take a break from COVID for as long as you humanely can. If that doesn't work out for you, a good shortcut is to focus on your body rather than your mind. We think ourselves into dilemmas that sometimes it's easier to behave our way out of them rather than think our way out. So you're caught in a negative spiral of thoughts. What you do is you go outside. You physically walk out the door and you stay outside for a period of time. I can tell you, if it's raining, the thing that you were worrying about inside will literally be washed away as you stand outside getting soaking wet. And it just demonstrates the point that physical interventions can help short circuit some of our negative thought spirals. So just get up and go outside is the second thing. And I think the third thing is to do with connecting with other people, which is so incredibly important. And bearing in mind that as we speak with people, their worries are probably identical to our worries. The nature of them, the extent of them, and the way we look for secret reassurance by slipping little things into conversations in the hope that somebody else will reassure us. Other people are doing the exact same thing to us. So those connections are so important, particularly if we can manage physical connection in some way, which is now so difficult and therefore more valuable. Be it meeting people while observing distancing and so forth, or even sending people written letters, or sending people parcels, or because in a lot of houses now, the arrival of the postman is the most exciting thing that happens in the whole week. So if you think of the excitement you feel, you can give that to somebody else, be it children sending painted leaves or little painted stones to grandparents. These are very powerful physical connections in a world that has become far too much online. And it's ironic I'm saying this now this evening, but those physical connections insofar as we can. So they're the three things: find the activity that absorbs you, go outside, and then make what physical connections we still can.
Okay, that's, excellent advice, really. And if we just get ourselves to do it, rather than think about it and think ourselves out of it, would be fantastic. Now, I have some questions from the audience that I imagine both of you will have quite a lot to say about. So the first one is from Beth. Can you suggest any coping tips speaking points or ideas for children while they can't visit their grandparents overseas, but desperately miss them. The children don't like to chat on FaceTime and just want to visit. So Malie, would you like to take that?
Yeah, it's a really hard one. I mean, my own father lives in Spain. He's just turned 80, and my kids are here, and we've missed seeing him 3 times, and I don't know when we'll next see him. But I think as much as possible, I think this idea of holding somebody in mind is really important. And I love what Brendan was saying about, you know, sending a card or a package. Like we've done that in the last few weeks. I'm afraid my mum is watching tonight, so I'm not going to tell her that I might have sent something. But just, even to, if you can do that, where you can even send, if it's not directly with your kids, but be sending photographs or updating. I do a lot of WhatsApp with my dad. I send him voice messages, maybe like a 6-minute message every couple of days. He answers back. It just kind of helps to keep that communication going, and maybe sending a few photos of the kids, or maybe asking the kids, what do you think we'll send granddad or granny, or, and acknowledging how hard that is for them, and letting them know, I suppose, giving them your perspective that this isn't going to go on forever. Even though it feels like forever in the life of a child, that it won't go on forever. But what small things can we do? Because don't force your kids, I suppose, to go on to Zoom or FaceTime or anything like that, because some kids just aren't comfortable with that, and that's okay. So maybe just try to find a way that they can connect, or else be sending photos yourself, and be the connector in between them, and give the news. I give the news of my dad to the kids and say, at the moment it's this kind of weather in Spain, and that's what's going on with COVID. And without going too much into COVID, obviously, but just suppose, yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, and I love the idea of not forcing it, because I think that sometimes makes it feel, raw and unreal. Yeah.
They've been through enough.
They have, yeah. So Brandon, I'm going to give you this one. This is from Deirdre. Any advice on what to do if your 10-year-old child expresses that they are depressed and thinking a lot about death and suicide? How should you respond to your child when they express this to you?
Well, the first thing is you do respond to your child, and you talk. Any person who's having thoughts like this that are so scary. Some people are scared they can even think such a thing. They might not mean it literally, but it's such a powerful thought that when you talk to them about it in a engaged and a caring way, you are making an enormous therapeutic intervention. You mightn't know at the time, but what you're demonstrating, what you're modeling to them, is that the thought that is overwhelming this child, or indeed if it's an adult as well, you can hear that and it doesn't overwhelm you. So you're containing it. It feels uncontainable to them. But if you talk to them, if you're not hesitant at all, if you're interested and engaged and rational, you are performing possibly the most therapeutic thing anybody can do, which is demonstrating you can contain this thought that feels uncontainable to the person who's telling you. So obviously, I don't need to tell you, you just stop everything else you're doing. This is now the most important thing in your life. You sit down and you listen for a more or less infinite period of time until the person plays through the child plays through the entire thing. I am going to hand this one over to Malie now, who has more to say about this. I know this from your book.
Well, I mean, I would say that as well. I just think I think parents panic when they hear something like this. And the first response is, oh my God, I can't believe my child is using the word death, and this is the worst thing possible. And they have an adult view of the situation. So they're thinking my child actually, and it's not to say that the child is obviously feeling so bad in that moment, and they might have heard this somewhere, that this is what they're expressing. So you're trying to get the need underneath what the child is saying. But if after a period of unpacking whatever's going on for that child and asking them, how long have you been feeling this way, and when do you feel it more, when do you feel it less, that kind of thing, you might, as Brendan I'm sure would say, is that you will need to get some support around that, because obviously, you're kind of but I think the most important thing is what Brendan is saying, is trying to remain calm. But I know it's really hard to remain calm if your child were to say that to you, but just know that, but don't dismiss it either, and kind of make it and think that, oh, they're just using those words because they saw it on TV last night. When a child is expressing something like that, accompanied, you're also looking for the signs. So you're looking at, has their mood been low in the last few weeks? Have they stopped engaging in activities that they enjoy? You know, what might be going on for them? And also, what's your child's temperament? Are they a child that is quite kind of, might make comments that are more, you know, kind of emotional than another child, you know? So you kind of know your child best, but I'd certainly be seeking support if you're more concerned after the conversation, and to keep talking about it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think that advice, that the most important thing you can do is listen to that, and stay with it. You know, ride the wave, I think is what you called it.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a good few questions, so I'm going to keep going. This one is about a 15-year-old girl that used to love school, but now won't go because of panic attacks at lunchtime. So,
Brendan, do you want to take that?
You fire ahead. I think this is your area.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose COVID, during the crisis, I did hear from some parents that for kids with social anxiety in particular, because around the teenage years, social anxiety becomes kind of more prominent because their peer group becomes more important. So it makes sense that social anxiety would be the type of anxiety that they might experience. So, you know, I think it's really difficult for kids maybe who have an anxious disposition, and where they had those few months at home during the pandemic where they were able to maybe lock themselves in their room, go online, do their homework from home, and just manage in a kind of a safe place to them. And then to go out into the world where, I mean, if she's a 15-year-old, you're talking about, she may have either done her junior cert or she's going to do her junior cert. But, you know, there's been a lot of panic and anxiety around the younger age group. And it's been, I think, incredibly hard for them because, you know, the whole thing that went on around the Sanaga, around the whole leaving cert, and how difficult that was for them. But I think it's hard for a 15-year-old. And I think, you know, if she's having panic attacks at school, it's about, you know, there are lovely methods that you can use with panic attacks. You can find them online, or it's a grounding technique where you use the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method, where you practice this when they're calm and try to kind of get them to notice 5 things they see, 4 things they hear, 3 things they can touch, 2 things they smell. So trying to engage their senses can be a little technique that they can use, but really kind of to acknowledge for them how it's been hard for them going into a school situation where there's this pandemic going on around them. They have to wear masks every day, and maybe talking to your child about what that transition has been like for them to be at home all those months with you, safe. And now that, you know, is there something worrying them? Very often kids might be worried about their parents in some way, or something going on with their peers, and you know, just asking them a little bit more about that. But you may need to get some help around that, and say the likes of Jigsaw, great service that work with younger, and there's lots of services out there that will work with young people as well. So there's a lot out there on social anxiety for teenagers, but normalize it for them. It's okay. It is okay. And it's a really hard time. And, you know, it's a really hard time for a lot of teens. But anxiety, you know, panic attacks are certainly, they can be very, very scary though. So acknowledging that for them, because they can really feel like you're going to die. So even the education about what's happening to their bodies, there are videos out there that can show that to them.
Excellent, thank you. Now this is an interesting question. Do you have any advice on how to support children when you are not their parent? Maybe you're a cousin, aunt, uncle, and a child confides in you. How should we responsibly respond from that position?
Brendan?
Again, Malie, I think this is your area.
Okay, well, if they confide in you, I think it's a great thing that they've confided in you. You know, I think that's a wonderful thing. I love that kind of campaign, one good adult. You know, sometimes the good adult, or the person that we feel most comfortable with, or that we trust the most. It can be hard to talk to your parents about certain things, you know. So I think it's important to, listen to the child who's talking to you. If you are, if you feel like it's not a concern that their parent needs to know about, and that maybe you are available to talk to them a little bit more about that, and you feel like you can get to the end of whatever that is, then I think it's okay to maybe continue that on for a while. But I suppose I would be just concerned about the fact that this child lives with their parent, and that it is important for the parent. I, as a parent, would want to know if my child was worried about something and telling somebody else, but you don't want to break that child's confidence. So you wouldn't go telling their parent, oh, your child is after telling me such and such, without letting the child know. What you would say to the child is, I am actually more than just a little bit concerned now that I've heard a few things about this. And, I would like to tell your parent about, what you've said. Can we maybe agree on a way I would tell them? Would you rather be there or not be there? So you're empowering the child. It's like, if, you're empowering them and say, how would you like it to be said? But, I feel like it's important for your well-being, for your safety as a child, that I would let your parent know. Which parent would you feel more comfortable with, that kind of thing. But I think, depending on the level of severity, but is how I'd react. But, if they're living with their parents, I suppose, you have to be kind of conscious of that as well. But I'd be very gentle in talking to the parent about it. So rather than saying you this, you that, just very concerned. And yeah.
Okay, that's great advice. And now this is from a parent of a 4-year-old who has heard people talk about the coronavirus. The 4-year-old has heard this and has shown a little concern. Is it better to be completely accurate and honest, or is it a little bit of masking and deflecting recommended when faced with questions about why everything is closed, why we can't see grandma, etc.? This is a 4-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that. I think it's really important to speak to your child in an age appropriate way. Like, by this stage, we're 8 months in the pandemic. At the beginning, I remember answering a journalist and saying, this is when I thought the virus is in China and it's not coming here. How, I feel really stupid to have thought that. I'm sure, but there's no way of concealing it. Your 4-year-old has noticed that you're wearing masks in places. They've noticed people taking a distance. They've noticed they're not seeing grandparents anymore. They've noticed, that their parents are working at home, and, all of the differences that have happened in the last few months. There are some beautiful, age-appropriate, child-friendly storybooks. I have them on my website. At the beginning of this pandemic, I put a page up on my website called COVID-19 Resources on drmaliecoyne.ie. I have the resources, the best ones that I had found, with the kind of, all you have to do is print them off, and a nice little storybook to your child about it. But I think it's important to kind of let them know there is a virus. I'm assuming they know that, already, but there is a virus. There are lovely videos actually as well that I've posted, but there is a virus, and that's, you always try to give a little bit of hope in it. So you kind of try to say, there is a virus, and it's, it's spreading amongst people. That's why they want to keep us in, so that it won't spread as much. Older people are we're not seeing granny and granddad because they're more, they might catch it, and if they catch it, they might get sicker. With my 7 and 9-year-old, they are aware that, people have died, but I also keep them posted. And I've told them in the last few days, guys, the numbers are going down. They know a few weeks ago the numbers were up, and now I've told them, I'm not telling them about the R number, but I've told them the numbers are going down. So instilling a little bit of hope, but not talking about it too much. As Brendan said, have your times for talking about it. But your 4-year-old knows that there's, they're seeing their play school teachers with masks on and everything, and kind of letting them know it won't last forever. And, expecting there might be more nightmares, or, bedwetting, or different things that they might go through. But I would certainly, a storybook could be a really nice way of doing that.
Okay, thank you. Just got a couple more that I'd like to squeeze in before we finish. So this is for Brendan. Any advice for dealing with anxiety, mental health in general, coming into the darker winter months?
Yeah, well, I guess we need to make particular efforts, to go outside, to remain physically active, to watch our diets, to watch our sleep patterns, to watch our activity. These things all slip when we're in the dark months. Now, we usually all get a boost at around Christmas. Certainly, it kind of tends to be a focus, and unfortunately, that seems to be tempered by concern about what level of restrictions we're going to be at. It is very helpful to start planning for Christmas around now, because everything is slower to get organized. Um, the other thing is to be very easy on ourselves, to be more compassionate on ourselves than we usually are. A lot of us are trying to be compassionate towards other people and understand their anxieties, but we do need to cut ourselves a bit of slack as well, and maybe stop talking about the current situation as a new normal and remind ourselves this is abnormal. So we need to go easier on ourselves than we mostly do, because this is a tough time. This is the rainy day, and this will pass.
And maybe then also you could take this one, because you talked about it. Aside from cutting screen time and particular apps completely, would you have any advice for children, teens actually, who have gotten into habits of unfavorably comparing their own lives to those of YouTubers, etc.?
So, I mean, the built-in human tendency to compare ourselves with other people is the cause of so much unhappiness since the beginning of time. And, the difficulties people talk about with social media, they're not new, but we're now able to compare ourselves, quicker and with more people than was previously possible. It is obviously very useful to spend less time on social media if it is proving problematic. There's so much that's good about social media as well. It allows people to connect up, and people who would otherwise be isolated, people in particular subgroups, people with disabilities, all kinds of groups can form, and that's really positive. But we do need an awareness that the human tendency to compare ourselves, comparing me when I arrive home from work on a Tuesday with a celebrity who has spent several hours with a team of stylists, I can tell you who comes better out of that one, and it's never ever me. So these comparisons, and yet we do them. We know this, and yet we do them. So physical ways into the boot of the car with all the family phones at 8 p.m. and lock the boot.
I'm coming to your house to check your car.
Hi, so am I. Okay, so Malie, one for you. Do you have any tips for helping children who are self-isolating to cope with anxiety? That they're self-isolating. How do they cope with it? 2 whole weeks for children.
Well, obviously, if your child is self-isolating, I imagine that you are as well. So, I suppose go back to where you came from in terms of the lockdown. We all were the first lockdown, we all were kind of isolating much more so back then when they weren't going to school. So I think, go back to what do they enjoy doing? Use Brendan's tools in terms of, obviously not having too much COVID related news going on in the house. Be mindful of not having, whatever radio station playing the whole time. And maybe ask your child, what would be a nice thing for us to do? I think building structure into their day can help. Kids actually love structure, and the structure, not too much structure, obviously, but most likely they'll have had, some work from school. But I think, try to take advantage of, if it's dry outside, to at least get out once a day, and to not focus, maybe try to use this as an opportunity that you're at home for a few weeks, that thankfully you're not feeling sick, hopefully you're not, and that we're not going to be having fun the whole time. Mummy or daddy has to do their work, at a certain time, because there's work still going, but that you have in your mind what the plan of each day might look like. It might just be a little bit easier for you to manage that if okay, there's going to be so many hours or so much time of screen time. We're going to, just have a rough plan of how that go, and build in some enjoyable activities. Like lately, we've been involved in a game of Monopoly that has run about nearly 2 weeks, where we keep going back to it. I take a photo of it, and it's stuff like that. The longer games you never get a chance to play might be a way, and obviously if they have particular worries or anxieties about different things, to be talking to them about that. But I love the idea of the worry box. I have it in my book, and just this whole idea of like worries can become very kind of uncontrolled. So if you talk about worries during a specific time, a few times a week rather than ad nauseum, and kind of say to them, we'll talk about that during worry time, and you can have a little box and they post their worries in the box and you take them out and you tear them up if they're no longer a worry, you put them back in if they are. So even stuff like that can just be really helpful. So I think maybe, and be kind to yourself, as Brendan said, get some time to yourself every day as well if you can, and lean on others for support too, because it's not an easy time.
You're dead right. It's tough 2 weeks, but I think there's a lot of very practical advice there. Now, look, I'm just going to squeeze in one last question. So I guess this is a university question. Any tips for a teen who has just started university, but it's all online? They have all the anxieties that would typically exist when starting college, but now everything's on Zoom. There's no study spaces or socializing. How to cope with the anxiety and uncertainty of this? So this, it's a very long question, but I'm only going to give you about a minute to answer it. I think it's a very common experience here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very common experience. Expectations are simply not being met. University or third level education is a time of socializing, a time of personal growth, a time of a transition to adulthood and so forth. We need to recognize it's very different. It is simply not going to meet some of those needs. And we have to acknowledge this straight up and then try and compensate as best as possible via the technology, via whatever physical communication is possible. But we just do need to be honest, and it's important we don't accept that this is how it will always be, because it won't. It will pass one way or other, and we need to have more than a little bit of hope about that, and we need to convey that as well, that these things do pass. Malie may have more to add to this.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you there, and I think it's it's a universal experience of students at the moment. When libraries reopen, I would encourage maybe that they go. Sometimes it can be helpful to study in a space with other students or meet them outside. There are, I know in NUIG, for instance, they have walking groups. So there are things that, that they can do outside in a socially distant way to actually have physical contact with people. Obviously, you need to be cognizant of the restrictions, but really validate what this is like for your child who's obviously gone through the whole Leaving Cert debacle and now it has, is facing into this, but that it won't go on forever, as Brendan said, but really validate that for them. And it's not easy. It's not easy at all.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about some of the huge difficulties with anxiety and that children particularly, are experiencing. So maybe you could both leave us with one of the things from your experience of this pandemic that you're going to keep and take forward with you in your life.
Well, what I take from this is that I and others are vastly more resourceful than I knew, or than certainly I would have given us credit for. We have adjusted to things that are unimaginable, and we are still trying to learn. Even everyone who tuned in here this evening, they tuned in because of a core belief that there are things we can do, techniques we can use, ways we can think to deal with something that was unimaginable to us 12 months ago. And everyone who tuned in here this evening is right. Even if you disagree with everything that we said, there are things we can do to get through this. And that, to me, is in itself a miracle and something I will take from this period in my life.
Okay, thank you, Brendan. Malie.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Brendan. Honestly, I think, I've asked people before what parts of normal are worth rushing back to. And I think, an important thing is that we are human beings. We are not human doings. And before this pandemic, I heard of, parents rushing around trying to bring their kids to 3 birthday parties in one day. I probably was one of those parents who had way too many activities going on. Yeah. And even though it's been really hard the last few months for you guys, I can totally understand. And for me, we have this common experience that there are aspects of the last few months that I really want to bring forward. I want to bring forward the kind of knowledge that simpler can be beautiful, having those moments where you deliberately slow down. I remember baking with my kids one day and literally deliberately slowing down in terms of getting the ingredients out because we had an entire day with nothing else to do. So it's like, you maybe trying to figure out what parts of this you know, would I like to keep going after the, you know, when things go back to whatever normal is? And also maybe to ask your children that, and to sit around the table and maybe just write down 1 or 2 things that you would like to keep going in your family tradition, you know, in terms of, you know, because I think this has given us an opportunity in a way as well, although it's also been very, very difficult. And I just want to say thank you so much for having me tonight. And I've absolutely loved everything Brendan wrote. Everything Brendan said, I wrote down. So I'm just like, wow, in awe. So thank you so much. And you too, Trish. Thank you.
Okay, so we have come to the end of this evening's discussion. I'd like to thank all the listeners for joining us, and to the authors, Dr. Malie Coyne and Dr. Brendan Kelly. Their books are available to buy. The link will be posted on the chat, or you can go to dublinbookfestival.com. And there are a number of different events that the Dublin Book Festival are hosting this week, and most of them and many of them are free. So please go to the website and have a look at it, and it's going on for quite some time yet. So everybody, thank you for coming, and good night.